this is pretty much the definition of price to performance. The prices of this have started to come down a little bit now too. Almost hit 200 FPS here at 1440p. Nerd facts. Hello everybody and welcome to this build guide that's actually all AMD. That's right, we're rocking full team red for this one with a target of hitting 1440p high refresh rate. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that this is the sweet spot for PC gaming, as it's very much a cake and eat it situation where you get all of that extra sharpness associated with Quad HD resolution, but then the extra smoothness and fluidity that you get from high refresh rate. But then of course you also get the added benefit of not needing to spend an absolute arm and a leg on all of your components. You can save yourself some money, and everything that we have here is very much geared towards price to performance. As always, we're going to start this PC by building on top of the motherboard box. And this video has actually been really helpfully sponsored by Gigabyte and AMD, and the board that we have here is the B550 Aorus Pro AC. And this is pretty much the definition of price to performance. It's a full-size ATX motherboard. It's got loads of features with things like PCI Generation 4, you've got USB Type-C on the back as well, so everything's super modern, but of course it supports the latest Ryzen 5000 series processors, which not only means you're going to get insane gaming performance, but you can actually put up to 16 cores in this thing. I really do love that you've got a few extra accents on this motherboard. You've got the Aorus logo, a few bits of silver and grey. You do have Wi-Fi on the back as well, which is really useful, I think, for a lot of people. If you don't have an Ethernet jack in your studio, well, most people don't have a studio. Shows how out of touch I am. If your office, study, or bedroom doesn't have Ethernet, then this is when Wi-Fi will come in handy. Let's plop this motherboard on top of the box, and we're going to open up our CPU slot just by raising this little lever. You can then grab your processor, and the one in question here is the Ryzen 5 5600X from AMD. And I absolutely love this CPU because the price to performance of this thing, again, is off the charts. But interestingly enough, this has some of the best gaming performance around. And in terms of frame rates, there's not really going to be much difference between this and the higher end chips. Yes, they have more cores, so you can do more with your computer, but if you just want to build a gaming PC, this is an absolute steal. And best of all, the prices of this have started to come down a little bit now too, so you really are getting incredible value. If you are trying to save money, then don't forget that you do also get a stock cooler in the box as well. It's not the best thing in the world, but it will certainly pass you a couple of months time if you need a little bit more money and you don't want to skimp out on any of the other components. But otherwise, you can grab the chip, being really careful not to bend any of the pins because that really would be a disaster area. The Ryzen text faces the left-hand side of the motherboard. You have a little gold arrow that you need to line up with the arrow on the motherboard. Push it in gently and then lower it back down with this little lever. And that's that. Grab yourself a screwdriver, a slightly smaller one, and then open up this top PCIe slot. Don't forget, by the way, that you do have this little peely cover on the back of our thermal material here. The SSD in question is a fan favorite. It's this one from Sabrent. It's the Rocket 4 Plus. And this is actually a Gen 4 SSD, and it is 1 terabyte in size, which does mean that this build is slightly more expensive than some of the others that I've done, but for good reason really, because 1 terabyte of storage is becoming more and more a necessity. And if you are going to go for a Gen 4 drive like we have here, which is super fast, then on a B550 motherboard you can actually only use one of them, so there's not really any point getting a 500 gig on this unless you know that you just don't care about the extra speeds. But if you want to be very future-proof and look forward to things like direct storage APIs and all of those interesting and fascinating things coming very soon, then go for a terabyte or larger. And before you say anything, I know you're just as much of a nerd as me, so don't pretend like you don't care about APIs and the fact that PHP stands for itself. It stands for PHP Hypertext Preprocessor. Nerd facts. Never done a dab in my life. Does that count? Let's grab our SSD out of the little container. We'll line it up with the slot and then screw it in with your screwdriver. In terms of RAM, 16 gigabytes really is the sweet spot at the moment. You can grab 32 if you're doing other things with your computer, including things like streaming. The stuff we've got here is from G.Skill. This is Trident Z Neo. This is running at 3200 megahertz, but as always, if you can grab 3600 for very similar money, it's what I'd recommend. Lower those down into the slot. Again, only one right way of doing this. It really is very simple. Should click. If you do want to see the difference in terms of game performance, by the way, between 16, 8 and 32 gigabytes of RAM, then you can actually find a video I put up last week that goes through all of this and shows you real life frame rate and all of the differences in the top right corner of your screen. With that all out of the way, we can now actually move on to our chassis, the case. And this one is brand new from Coolmaster. This is the Master Box 540. And I know this is going to look great, but whether it actually is going to perform as well, I'm not too sure, and let me explain to you why. So we don't have a mesh front, which is a little bit of a shame, but that's okay. There are plenty of cases out there that don't want to do that. It is a conscious decision. However, with this one, I have spotted a bit of an issue, and this isn't something I expected, if I'm honest, from a company called Cooler Master, but all of the vents that you do actually have here look fine on the outside, but when you actually take a look on the inside, they seem to be pretty much blocked by the frame. So the limited airflow that you have is actually restricted. I mean, the ventilation is here, but then it's blocked. Why? I probably should explain what Cooler Master are actually trying to do here, and essentially you've got some fancy RGB on the front that I assume can only happen if you do have this back panel actually blocked out, and it's probably got some sort of mirror inside it. The airflow on the top is absolutely fine. This is completely mesh on the front, so if you want to put like a big radiator or something up here. In my eyes, the theory of this just doesn't really make sense. On a brighter note, however, we do have some RGB fans. These are the Masterfan MF120 Halos, and I haven't actually used these before, but I've seen plenty of videos of them and they really do look pretty cool. Do make sure, of course, that the airflow is actually going in the direction that you want it. So here I'm going to have all of the fans blowing this way, and then when we do put the radiator in, those will actually be an exhaust. Add the fans at the front. The fans are installed, which means we can now actually get the motherboard inside the case. So we're going to need our bag of screws. Pick up your motherboard and just gently lower that into the gap. Then you can just secure it down into place with those screws. Moving on, it's time to talk about our CPU cooler, and this one is hot off the presses. I think it was released a couple of weeks ago. This is the Master Liquid ML240 Illusion, and the main reason we're going to use this is not only for visuals, but because the fans actually match the ones that we're using with the rest of the case. This definitely isn't the cheapest one that Cooler Master sell, but I imagine when you compare the real world pricing to the likes of your Lian Lees and your Corsairs, this is probably going to come out on top. Or is it bottom? It's going to be cheaper, probably. Before you fit the fans to the radiator, it's always worth grabbing hold of one and just doing a little test fit to make sure everything is actually going to work the way that you're expecting it to. Before we drop that into our case, a tip that I've learned over the years is to actually now get your power supply and route the CPU power cable to the top and actually put this into the board, because once you put that radiator in, all of the things at the top do start to get quite restricted and it becomes quite difficult if you don't have dainty little hands. Rather surprisingly, the power supply that we're using here today is also brand new. This time it's from Be Quiet. This is the Pure Power 11 FM. I assume that the FM stands for fully modular and not frequency modulation. Computer science degree, paying off, other than the student loan payments I have to make every month. But clearly it was worth it, so I could tell you what FM stands for. It's rated gold for efficiency. It has 650 watts of power, which should be more than enough for the system that we're building here today. But then also they're very quiet. Clue's probably in the name, right? And genuinely, the last build that I made, it was really quiet, but then I noticed this noise coming from the power supply. And if you're in that situation, you'd be like, oh, because obviously you're not going to want to replace the whole power supply just to solve a little noise issue. It's worth doing properly in the first place. We can also connect our little fan splitter that came in the box with our cooler, as again, it's easier to do that now. Grab your CPU cooler, making sure that you've obviously got it in the right orientation, and then just drop this into place, and then just screw it in from the top. To fit the pump, you're going to need to install the AMD mounting hardware, and a mistake a lot of people make with Cooler Master coolers is to actually screw it from the top, but you do need to come from underneath to get this nice and secure. This bit is definitely easier if your case is flat, but obviously I want to show you what it is that I'm doing. You grab your thermal paste that comes in the box and you just put a little X. That was actually a bit too much. Grab your pump head and just get this little top hook to line up with the AMD mounting hardware. And then you hook the bottom one on, connect the pump to a fan header at the top, daisy chain all of the RGB cables into this one singular ARGB block, then plug that in where it says D LED 1 at the top of the board. The radiator fans connect to that splitter that we've already connected, but the front and the rear fans do need to go into the motherboard, so we grab all of those cables and we will plug them into these 3 ports here on the right, and then if we need them, we've got 2 more down here at the bottom. If you are listening, Cooler Master, I'm not sure why you thought it'd be a good idea to put a warranty void if removed sticker right next to the bit that you're actually going to plug into your motherboard, because when you plug it in, well, all you can see is a massive sticker, and obviously you're going to remove it. So is this a way of getting out of your warranty payouts? Probably not. It was just poor planning. USB 3 is down here at the bottom in rather fashionable Cooler Master purple. While the case does have USB-C on the front, sadly there isn't actually anywhere to connect this cable on the motherboard itself. Usually with B550 you have USB-C either on the front or the back, and on this particular motherboard, as we've already mentioned, it is on the back. Instead, we're going to move on to the power connections, and here we have power, reset, power LED, and it's all in this tiny little block down here at the bottom right. With that out of the way, we can press swiftly on to our power supply that we have prepared earlier. So we connect our motherboard ATX, a PCIe connector for the graphics card, and then the CPU for, you guessed it, the CPU. I am connecting both of these PCI connectors so that we can actually run both of these cables and just give our graphics card a little bit of a cleaner power supply. It shouldn't really make any difference, to be honest, but better safe than sorry. Oh, you know what? Be quiet, I've done it again. They've got this really ugly label on the other side and there's a cutout for it on this case. Please be quiet, put this somewhere else. I'm just gonna have to go rogue for this and have the fan facing upwards, which isn't the end of the world. It is just going to give our power supply some slightly warmer air, but then again on the plus side it is actually going to act as like a bit of extra ventilation for that graphics card, so who knows, it might actually help us a little bit. Which then leaves us, I think, with one last thing to do: install the graphics card, our 6700 XT Team Red. This card is Gigabyte's gaming OC, and genuinely I do think this is my favourite third-party cooling solution on the market. It's because I think they've pretty much nailed everything that people want from their graphics cards. It looks good, you do have a little bit of RGB, but it's nothing too crazy or out there. You've got 3 fans, so the temperatures and the acoustics are very, very good. It's definitely worth noting with the 6700 XT that you do get 12 gigabytes of VRAM in this, which is going to be useful for creative applications, but also if you want to play something like Watch Dogs and you turn all of the settings up to max, that uses a lot of VRAM, and obviously this problem is only going to continue into the future. Let's remove slot covers 2 and 3. This time they actually come out. You don't have to worry about snapping a bit off your motherboard like I did in my last video. If you want to see how that went, you can find it in the top right corner of your screen. I was livid. Then you can grab your 6700 XT and then give it a nice firm push into place. Once you've fixed it down with the same screws, you can then grab your power supply connections, pull them through from the other side and just push them into place. Spin it round so you can actually see our finished creation. That does hopefully work. We do of course need to test that. So let's grab a monitor and then see if this works. Remember to turn it on this time. We have noise. We have RGB. Success! I honestly didn't expect this to work first time straight out the box, because normally with B550 motherboards, they don't actually support Ryzen 5000 out the box. You need to flash the BIOS in order to get this to work. On this motherboard, it'd be really easy. You just download the latest BIOS file from the web. You then label it as gigabyte.bin on this USB drive. You plug it into the back and there's a button called QFlash Plus. You press this button for a couple of seconds and then it will update the BIOS for you. So even though you don't have a supported CPU, technically you sort of do, because as soon as you press that button and the BIOS is flashed, then your motherboard should be ready to use. I've done it before and it is pretty straightforward stuff. I'll tell you what though, this system really does look incredible. As I said, I've never used these fans before, but they really are a bit of a statement piece. I haven't actually seen the front of this yet, so as I spin round, we can actually have a proper look together. If I'm honest, a little bit disappointing to be honest. Think how much airflow we're losing as a result of that infinite mirror. They could have done so much more with it. I actually tested a case that was almost a little bit similar to this a couple of months ago, and I didn't like that, but I did at least like the look of the case from the front. Whereas this, it's almost a little bit plain for what is an infinite mirror. I think they could have done more with this, to be honest with you. But anyway, that doesn't really matter because obviously you can just get a different case. The thing I was more interested in is what it looks like inside, and I really do think it looks fantastic. But let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. I have already installed Windows, so I don't need to do it for this. So join me in just a second when I get all of the games updated and we can give you some performance benchmark numbers. Ladies and gentlemen, I do believe we're all set up and ready to go. It was actually very simple. I have done a BIOS update on this, enabled resizable bar and XMP to give us the best performance. The first game for testing is actually new to me. This is Resident Evil Village. This is running at Quad HD 1440p with ray tracing and variable rate shading. It's a surprisingly good looking game actually. This is right at the start, so there's absolutely no spoilers or anything like that. But this is one that is properly optimized for the AMD ecosystem. It also has their AMD Fidelity FX CAS system. I haven't played a horror game in ages actually. Maybe this is an excuse to get back into them. Lower it down to 1080p and our frame rate has definitely increased. Not as much as you'll find with some other games that don't use ray tracing. Let's move on though to the most difficult title in our testing, Cyberpunk 2077. And this is a game I'm really actually keen to test the ray tracing on with an AMD graphics card. We'll start off with 1440p without any ray tracing. Once again, we're running the dynamic CAS system. I've set the resolution anywhere between 80 and 100%. And to be getting around about 60 frames a second in Cyberpunk at 1440p is fantastic, because while this is without any ray tracing at all, it still is a fantastic looking game. If we go into the settings though and actually turn on some ray tracing, so we'll set this to the medium preset. If I can actually find it, there we go, ray trace lighting, and we have that on medium, and we turn on reflections and shadows. And I imagine this is gonna bring it down to around about 30 frames a second or so. Yeah, around about 40 FPS. The way I played a fair chunk of the game was actually to turn ray trace reflections off and ray traced lighting, but leave the shadows on, which I know might be blasphemy to some people, but this still gives you a much more natural looking game, I think. But then as you can see from the frame rate, it is far, far higher. So this is actually a great way of getting almost the perfect balance really between performance, but then getting that lovely visual goodness too. As expected, we haven't seen any issues with thermals thus far, but that was not real world. So let's put this side panel back on and actually see whether this quite literally hots up as we proceed with some Forza Horizon 4, my favourite racing game, and the one that does have that Battle Royale mode that I do still play most weekends. Not always, I am a busy chap, alright? Some mornings I have to go to the shop and buy some croissants. The thing that is awesome about this game for testing is not only that it looks so good, but this can actually run at 4K, and I believe that this actually runs a lot better on AMD systems too, especially if you do use smart access memory. Just for a bit of fun, we will lower down the resolution to 1440p, and you can see the scaling is still really good. That Ryzen 5 CPU honestly works wonders for gaming, and you're quite easily able to almost hit 200 FPS here at 1440p. So if you want to grab a 240 FPS monitor and play at Quad HD, then clearly this is the game for you. Which leaves us with just one more game, our multiplayer title, some Fortnite. And I'm definitely not afraid to admit it, this is my favourite bit about making these videos, because it's my guilty pleasure. I love a bit of Fortnite. Oh, it's for kids. Yeah, that's probably why I'm good, because I'm not up against much competition. Everybody out of the bus and let's dive towards our, hopefully, victory royale. This is 1440p at ultra settings and with a frame rate around about 120 frames a second. Definitely nothing to complain about here whatsoever. Of course, if you do want to go for an even higher frame rate, then you can try turning down the settings to 1080p resolution. And here we're not quite getting 200 FPS, but it's anywhere really between 160 and 180, which is not only going to give you that extra bit of responsiveness, but if you are lucky enough to have a really high refresh rate monitor, then this is going to make you pretty much the most competitive gamer that I know you can be. Taking a closer look at those thermals, I have to admit that maybe I was wrong, because what we've got here isn't optimal, because clearly there is restriction at the front of this case, there is no way around that. But it hasn't really mattered for this system at all. And when you actually look at the thermals, even though we're not fully maxed on the CPU, we are on the GPU, and we're hitting highs of around about 68 degrees. That's it, 68 degrees, and that is definitely what I was worried about by having this front panel there. Having said that though, if you want my advice, don't get this. If you're after a Cooler Master case, then their TD500 I think looks a little bit better anyway, but that does have a proper mesh front. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, so do let me know down in the comment section below. Do you like the look of this case? Do you think the front is less than optimal, or would it not bother you? If you do want to check out current pricing on any of the parts featured, then as always you can find them linked down below. But a massive thank you for you guys for watching. Smash that like button if you've enjoyed it, get yourself subscribed, and I'll see you in the next one.